spring and summer looks like it may be upon us. So thanks everyone for coming. So let's just thank our sponsors, which is Archive Magazine, Pro Photo Daily, American Photographer, American Illustration, Epson Printers, and Photo Shelter. So tonight we have three terrific presenters, and we have Ashok Sinha and Alexis Holloway, and we start off with Ian Spanier. So Ian, it's all yours, buddy.
Thank you. All right, everybody, thanks for joining me. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see what I'm looking at over here.
Aaron, great.
And if you can just confirm just by telling me that you can see that, that'd be great.
Give it another shot, Ian.
Okay. There, I see why.
There we go.
Yep.
We see it.
All right, good.
Just full screen, Ian.
Yep, sorry, it's giving me it's hiding on me. There we go. Now you should see it, yes? All right, perfect.
Yes, sir.
We're seeing your presentation piece. Like we see slide 2.
Okay, hang on one second. Sorry about that.
All right.
Let's stop that share for 1 sec.
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
All right, great, guys. Thank you so much. All right, so what I thought I would do for you guys is walk you through my sort of unusual path to being a photographer. I actually know Frank from part of that history, which started actually when I was about 19 years old and interning at GQ magazine in college. And essentially what happened with me is that I went to college thinking I was going to play soccer for 4 years, study sports medicine, and ultimately move on to some sort There. You hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically, sorry, I'm getting a reverb back. Are you hearing me okay?
Now it's back.
Okay, good. All right, so yes, so I went to college thinking I was going to play soccer for 4 years and study sports medicine, and ultimately end up being some sort of a pro trainer with a sports team. That was sort of the dream. I ended up only playing 1 year of soccer in college, and what happened was really that my grades were suffering, and I had been doing photography since I was about 6 years old, and I used to draw and paint, and so I had a bit of an art background. And I figured out that if I took art classes, I could keep my GPA up. So I started taking drawing and painting, and then ultimately in the spring trimester, photography came along. And since I had basically had that knowledge already in me, I figured, okay, I'll just continue with photography. By the second year of college, I was spending more time in the dark room than I was in the training room, and started to feel this shift in where my head was. And that was very unusual for somebody like me, because I'm a very decisive person, and I literally all through high school knew exactly the path that I wanted to be on. And my best friend, who's still my best friend since I was 3, actually said to me, "Nah, man, you're an artist. You're going to be an artist." And ultimately, it did come true, which we still joke about today. But after that second year of college, I really started to, think college was a waste of time for me. And I was fortunate enough to have a very good advisor who pushed me to join a program in New York City, working for 2 photographers for about 10 weeks, which is the same as one of the trimesters for college. That experience was really my only assisting experience. minus one minor other thing I'll mention. But really, that was the change of my path. And at that point, I really decided, one, New York City was where it was at, and the real world was where it was at, and that I really did not want to go back to college. But I'm the kind of person that likes to finish something I start. So I did go back to school, but at that point, I did switch fully to being an art major with a specialization in photography. Ultimately being the only photography major in my class, which was kind of odd, but also great at the same time. Then I followed up that semester at school, trimester at school, with that internship at GQ. And at that point, I really did discover something that I wanted to do. I had sort of made up my mind that I did not want to live in an apartment in Brooklyn with 12 roommates. And, that was the experience I was having in college already. So I sort of latched on to this idea of being a photo editor and sort of sold myself on the idea that I was a better editor than I was a photographer. I was better at looking at people's work, and I would always have photography around to sort of have as a hobby. And I was being exposed to so much amazing photography in this short period of time. And at the same time, I was on set with these amazing photographers, and I sort of was befriending this community of photographers that was none of which influenced me to want to be a photographer. And I kept telling myself, you don't want to be a photographer, you don't want to be a photographer. So in that, experience, I really got to see not only the combination of what I learned in college as far as the kind of photography that I was attracted to, which always has sort of lent towards the masters of photography like Irving Penn and Bresson and that lot of photographers. And then, from a contemporary standpoint, one of the very first jobs I was on was with the great Albert Watson, and, it was with David Bowie. And I always tell this story how everyone in the office was really jealous that I was going to meet David Bowie, but I literally shook hands with Mr. Bowie and said, thanks for doing this today. And all my attention was focused on Albert Watson and his setup and, everything he was doing. I mean, I was a huge, and still am a very huge admirer, and he influences me constantly. I still look at his work on a very regular basis. And then I was sort of in a very unique position in that I sort of got very close with the great Harry Benson, legendary photographer who came to America with the Beatles and has photographed every president from Eisenhower to Trump. And really that experience shaped a lot of who I am as a photographer. I would have lunch with Harry regularly. He used to pull a little trick where he would have me come to his house to pick up the jobs that he was shooting rather than a messenger. And he would always make a story up that it was too valuable to go with a messenger. So he would ask me to personally go and get it. And he was sort of a mentor and a third grandfather in a lot of ways. And the stories I would get from Harry, again, just shaped so much of who I am as a photographer. And, with that, I still was in school. And at school, I was really being pushed towards sort of the art aspect of being a photographer. But I think I was always commercially minded. I think the influence from working at the magazine, and then add to that, seeing that I did not necessarily look at a career as a art photographer and didn't know how I could do that. Whereas commercially, it made a lot more sense to me. I then went on to going back to GQ after I graduated, and then ultimately moving through a number of magazines for about 13 and a half years. So GQ, Esquire, ESPN, Marie Claire, Men's Health, Men's Journal, Us Weekly, all of these titles, hiring the great photographers of our time during the 90s and early 2000s, and then still having a photography career of my own.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Where I was shooting, still life primarily. And a part of the reason that I lent towards that was that it was a very great side hustle. Everyone sort of knew me as a photo editor, and I didn't really have to display myself out there. I kind of just got jobs through word of mouth. And at the time, the first boss I had at GQ, quite frankly, was a music manager who was temping at GQ and ended up as the senior photo editor. And so I saw it as a situation where I could take advantage because I had a photography background, I had an art history background, and I had experience on set at that point. So I looked at it as I was this kind of unique person. At the time, there wasn't a lot of photographers who were also photo editors. Nowadays, it's quite different. So what ultimately happened, though, is that I started to get better and better as a photographer. I was teaching myself lighting. I was teaching myself medium and large format, all things that we didn't do at school. And then essentially started to get into this very odd position where my creative director bosses would say, well, why don't you just do this job because you get it. It makes more sense that you do it. Or there were situations where maybe the budget was super tight and they said, well, you know what, if you go in, then we can save a little bit of money. And I was working deals with these magazines that hired me where I would work at a lower rate so that I could have my salary plus a little extra on the side to do these photo shoots. And it started to stick with me each place I went. And ultimately, my portfolio was growing and growing. I was moving from shooting still life to travel and adventure and beauty and celebrity and pretty much everything. So I kind of dipped my toe in all these different areas. And I think, again, that goes back to that influence from photographers like, you know, I'll mention Penn as the main one because he really does shoot everything. And I really kind of started to develop this idea that photographers shoot what they see. Now, there's nothing wrong with the photographer who specializes in still life or specializes in travel or portrait or celebrity. I just happen to be one of those ones that can do a lot of different things. And I mean, it's ultimately in the eye of the beholder, but I think I do them all fairly well. And that kind of brings us to, you know, the main point for me, which is that, you know, it comes down to lighting. And I've had this belief throughout my whole career, which is pretty much that lighting is as much a part of telling the story as the subject of the image is. And I was also a psychology major in college. So I've always sort of blended the two sets of mind in this, and the idea that there's a psychology behind how you light and how you perform your job on set. And it has a lot to do with how successful you can be as a photographer. So fast forward or so to 2003, and essentially what took place at that point was that I started to find that I was on set watching photographers screw up jobs that I knew that I could do. And it got very frustrating as a photo editor. No matter how good I thought I was as a director, there was times where photographers just didn't get it. And I think what worked well for me as a photo editor, the reason I could work at all these different types of magazines, you know, from a GQ to a Marie Claire, is that I understood the voice of the client being the magazine. So because I understood the voice, I could sort of be a chameleon and I could sort of blend my direction to the photographers on how I wanted them to do that job to speak to that voice of each of those magazines. And then as a photographer, I was doing the exact same thing. And then what kind of dawned on me was that I was sort of in a very odd position in that I knew I could do these jobs. I had built a certain amount of confidence, and it was really a byproduct of these creative directors who were so kind to me to give me the work that they believed that I could do. So I believed I could do it. So in 2003, I had sort of reached my breaking point, and I had decided that I no longer wanted to be a photo director, and I really just wanted to be a photographer. So I, after 9/11, I was working at Marie Claire, and I stayed on because I saw where the kind of magazine industry was going and the difficulty of being a full-time photographer. And then in 2003, the blackout in New York happened. And I just had this weird moment where I was standing in the same place that I was during 9/11, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I said, you know what, I got to get out of here. And at that point, I decided to move to LA, but still not fully confident that I was ready to be a full-time photographer. And I had worked a deal with Muscle and Fitness magazine that at the time was being published out here. And I was able to sort of be a 70% editor and a 30% photographer for them. And within maybe 2 or 3 months, that 70-30 started to shift 60-40. And then all of a sudden it was 70-30 in the other direction. And the editors were finding the same thing that the editors in New York were finding, which was that I just understood what they were trying to say. And there was not so much effort in trying to get me to understand as a photographer what exactly they were trying to say. And at that point, I really felt that I was ready to move on and just be a full-time photographer. I had this idea in my head that it would take me 2 or 3 years in LA to get New York to kind of forget about me as a photo editor. To be honest, it took 2 weeks and New York completely forgot about me. So
Ian,
at that point, yes.
you got to start showing some images.
Okay, that's coming right now. Sorry.
All right.
I was leading up to it. So at that point, I entered the full-time world of being a full-time photographer, and essentially got a job as a staff photographer for a media company that published 3 at the time, and then ultimately 6 magazines. And at that place, I was able to run the budget as a photo editor, but at the same time be the staff photographer. So that brings us into my work. So what ultimately has happened over the years is that I've decided that by default, the industry wants me to be in a box. And that is very difficult for somebody that shoots what he sees. And so I started to think about who am I as a photographer? And in part of that, what I decided was that ultimately I'm doing portraits, whether it's a box of nails or Morgan Freeman, I'm still making a portrait. And again, it always comes back down to the lighting. And what I try to convey through this lighting is a story that I'm trying to tell for that day, whether it's the client story, whether it's the subject story, whether it's my story, but I'm always trying to utilize that combination of lighting with whatever and whoever my subject is. The hope for me as a photographer, even though there is this wide variety of capabilities, is that there is some kind of a common thread. And again, that thread always to me is down to the lighting. So what I would consider is that portrait at this point is about half of my work. And the reason I say that is that I still get work in a very different area, which is in the fitness community. Something I never planned to do, but I think that little bit of sports medicine background sort of lended itself to having an eye towards the details that take place in fitness and the anticipation that takes place in capturing sport and fitness imagery. So most of the work that I do is in this area, but then it leads right into the fitness work that I still do. So at this point, I'm back in New York, but Muscle and Fitness is now a client of mine and not my employer. And it just so happened that they liked what I did. So it didn't matter whether I was in New York or LA or Ohio or wherever I was, but they were still hiring me to do all these jobs. And, you know, even though it's a very different subject matter and a different mentality in a lot of ways, I would still argue that the work is still on that same common thread about lighting, and that I'm using this lighting to help tell the story, whatever it is. So as I mentioned, I really never intended to shoot this kind of work, but that background I think fit into it. And I think now we're nearly 20 years later and I'm still doing annually quite a bit of work in the fitness arena. The important part to me about fitness really has come into the fact that it spreads me out as a photographer. Now, there are clients who I still shoot product for. And the only reason it happens is that I will be on set and something will come up where they'll say, hey, by any chance, do you know anybody who shoots a product? And I say, well, I can, you know, what is it? And it's become a very big asset for me. And I think for as many years as I fought with clients, helping them understand that I could shoot travel and I could shoot portrait and I could shoot still life, now it's becoming, it's sort of how things go. They go in circles in a lot of ways and things change constantly. And so sticking with this idea that I'm a photographer who shoots what I see, I can still maintain this ability to be available and it's an asset. Whereas, you know, maybe 15 years ago, it was a detriment in so many ways because people would complain that they didn't understand me. If there's one piece of advice that I would give to photographers, and I don't care if you are a new photographer or the most seasoned photographer, and it's the importance of personal work. This is where I push myself and I experiment and I try to showcase what I see without a product attached to it, without a client attached to it, without any other mentality other than my own. And I can't stress enough how important it is to continually have personal work as something that's part of what you do on a regular basis.
And Ian,
this is part of, yes, sir.
When you come up with your personal work, like, how do you go? What's the process you go through? I'd like to shoot this, or this is something I had in the back of my head. Absolutely.
So, great question, because that is exactly how this project right here came off. This is my project called Right Next Door, which is a collection of portraits of interesting people who live all around us that you have no idea what their story is. And with it, I used it as a vehicle to learn video. And I was doing interviews with all my subjects as well as doing a still portrait. And from a technical standpoint, I challenged myself by going into these jobs with no more than 2 lights. And I would never use modifiers necessarily. I would look for a white wall to bounce a light into or a ceiling to bounce a light into. And the only time I would use a second light is if it was in a very dark space and I just needed to add a little bit more light into the room. So I was kind of accomplishing a couple of checkboxes with that. And the idea formed from a barbecue that I was at, where I was having a chat with this guy who I'd never met. And he was talking, he was kind of going like this. And I got into a whole conversation about back pain. And I was telling about this book I had just read by John Sarno about back pain being more of a mental thing than a physical thing, unless you've been in a car accident or something, slipped and fell on black ice. And he goes, well, I got shot 9 times, so that's why my back hurts. And in that conversation, I learned that he was a special agent at the port of New York. And a guy had come out of a shipping container, cargo ship container, and shot him. And that's how he had this back issue. And it started this idea in my head of something I wanted to showcase, how we don't talk to people anymore, how we live our lives buried in our phones and iPads, and we just don't really collaborate with our neighbors as much as we used to. So it was a sort of a comment on that aspect. And then at the same time, as I mentioned, from a technical standpoint, I consider myself a very technical photographer in a lot of ways, and I'm very precise with where I'm going to put my lights and all that. And with this, I wanted to throw all that out the window and just show up with a couple lights and bang them into a wall, and that would be it. So that project was about 3.5 years, which spanned over the time that I moved back to LA for the second time, which is where I live now. And sort of just fizzled out a little bit, but I sort of felt like I had finished it. I got some nice attention to it. I got it published in a few different places. And ultimately, I put the stories up on my website. Never fully got around to as much of the video as I wanted to. I captured a lot of it, but I did learn that I really hate editing video. As much as I love retouching, I cannot stand editing video. So now I learned that I collaborate with another entity to do that. So my latest personal project is called Moto, and it is just, again, an idea that sort of came to me driving down the road, which we do a lot of out here. And I basically I love motorcycles. I don't ride one, but I sort of want to. But I kept seeing all these people riding motorcycles and how many different people ride motorcycles out here. And what I essentially decided was that I was going to base my subjects on the bikes and the bikes that I like, and then wanted to meet that person as a result of it and make their portrait. So I'm very carefully handpicking who my subjects are for this. And as an added challenge, I wanted to shoot something in a different style than I normally do. I tend to shoot, for all you technical people, I tend to shoot usually around f7.1. That's kind of like sweet spot on most of my lenses. So it's kind of where I live most of the time. And I wanted to shoot with a much higher aperture. So I thought I would challenge myself with that. And then to add to that as well, made an entire studio out of my living room. in order to do this, which includes, lights pushed all the way up against the front door and me jammed into a little small space and shooting down this very narrow tunnel between the staircase and my living room. And to add to that, I started it 2 days before the pandemic hit. So this was my very first subject, and I absolutely loved the images. I really liked where I was headed with this, but now I was stopped by a global event. And I sat still for about 5 weeks and I really couldn't take it anymore. So again, always sort of having that commercial mind inside, I thought, how can I utilize this situation to have something in my arsenal to continue to work as a photographer during this difficult time? And what I discovered was that a combination of my equipment and my ability to create this studio on location like this, which is something I was doing fairly regularly, but never in my house, it allowed me to have a marketable product to put out to the world and say, look what I can do in my home during a period of time when we can't necessarily go into studios and all those other limitations. And then as well, I used my Cam Ranger, which was an accessory for cameras that allows me to shoot a JPEG to a laptop or an iPad during a shoot. And what I was able to do was put together a system that my client could be sitting anywhere in the world as long as they had Wi-Fi and I had Wi-Fi, and they could watch my shoot live, get images in real time, and be a part of the shoot by interacting over Zoom or whatever platform like that. So I continued to shoot at that point, and now I've got a handful of subjects done, and I've just continued to do it in a very safe manner. I took a COVID compliance course so that I could put myself in a position to just be more knowledgeable about whatever was to come next. And it's, in my mind, it's about adapting, and I'm a big believer in that adapt or die mentality. So pushing myself always to be in a place where I've got something that can be sold to clients and potential clients to continue to bring work to me, to continue to do what I love, and to not ever have to go backwards, but always to keep moving forward. So at this point, I would love to take any questions you might have. I hope that kind of gave you a glimpse of this sort of unusual path that I took, and I'll open the floor up.
Yeah, so my video. So where do you go with this project? Is it over? Do you continue? What do you want to do next, Ian?
So before we kind of went live, we were kind of chatting a little bit about books, and of course, it's ever mindful to get your work published. I have a couple of books under my belt, but quite honestly, I never found the experience great. It is something that I consider, and I do still talk with a lot of creative director friends about if they have any interest in it. I am still shooting. I've got about a dozen subjects done, handpicked, as I said. So it's a little slow of a process. I have a couple people lined up who are waiting to get vaccinated, or different reasoning behind it, or just availability issues. So I'll know, I guess, when I'm done, when I feel like I've got a good representation of the community that I'm trying to showcase. I am photographing the bikes a little bit, mind you. I didn't show any, but it's really about the people. And I'm sort of open to the idea of printing it. I might self-publish it. I have been able to get some press from PPA on it, and I got an article published on really the behind the scenes aspect of how I took this difficult situation and turned a living room into a studio like this. And I think, for teaching purposes, it's great for the lectures that I do. And then if it attracts some attention, great. I mean, some of the people that I photographed are connected to Harley Davidson. Some of them are dealer ownerships, things like that. So, again, it's that commercial mind that sort of takes over quite often. I'm not so interested in, the artist part in some ways, but I do talk a lot about being an artist and a business person. I think that's a big sort of left brain, right brain type mentality that I have. So that's kind of that.
So you mentioned the bicycles. Will you do any still life? Because I'd love to see that stack of nails.
I have shown some of the bikes. They're on my website. If you go to that personal work section of the site, you see a couple of the bikes there. And as well as that influence is always ever present, but I photographed the glove of one of the guys just because it looked cool, and it was a very sort of Irving Penn style, if you want to go there. So yeah, it still is there, and it's living on my website at this point. And again, PPA or some other, Westcott, which is one of my sponsors. I've had a great relationship and ability to use, Instagram and other social media outlets to really showcase this work. And, hopefully somebody will see it and say, oh, well, we need to do something with this.
Yeah, see, this is really a great marriage for doing personal work that you can end up using to promote yourself that gets you commercial work, right? You're doing something that you love.
And that's very much the intention, yeah.
Yeah, you're doing something that you love that you can end up, creating a piece that, any, whether it's in the motorcycle field or any space, just seeing beautiful portraits done, with beautiful light. I mean, that's the dream, right? It's
Absolutely.
Really terrific. So thank you, Ian, very much. We will take
I appreciate
1
it.
minute.
And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll take a quick little break, and we'll get Alexis up next. And what's her name? Louisa Curtis just mentioned that Chris Buck created a career around his personal work. You know who also does that a lot is Sandro out of Chicago. He does a lot. He'll go to Cuba. He'll do boxers, a whole slew of personal work that gets him commercial work. So that's a really great example for everyone to go do what you love and then find a way to promote it, especially in social media where it's inexpensive. See, Ian is the one person that doesn't need a rep. He does it himself.
Not opposed.
He does not need a rep. All right, so let's just take a 1 minute. Everyone wants to refresh their drink, and we'll come right back. All right, let's get Miss Holloway up. Alexa, it's all of you. Alexis, it's all you. You knew I was going to do that. Oh, we can't hear her.
Hello.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Alexis. And I just want to say, speaking of lighting, Frank, that you are a light for this community.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks. Very nice.
Okay, let's see if I can. All right. Okay, is that good? Got my screen up?
Yep, you're good.
So I'm in Brooklyn. I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas. And I came to photography via filmmaking. So my background is as an independent filmmaker and also as a field producer for independent films and reality television and documentaries. And so I find myself like sort of naturally gravitating towards storytelling. And so Portraits of My Neighbors is basically a photographic documentation of a journal.
Fly over the site virtually, you have callouts to click on.
It's a documentation of a local journal called Voices of Lefferts, which are these right here. I don't know if you can see, there's 4 journals that I worked on over the course of about 2 years. And so it's a project that recruits local residents in an effort to collectively tell the legacy and change of the neighborhood that I was living in, which is Flatbush or Prospect Lefferts Gardens. And so the project basically is people telling my neighbors, it's about my neighbors, and they're talking about their life through their relationship with the neighborhood in the form of an essay. And so then I'm following them around the streets of Flatbush, their homes and churches and parks while they tell me their story of, you know, how they got here and why this is home. This is Deborah Mutnick. She is the creator and director of Voices of Lefferts, and she's a professor at LIU. And I really like her description of the journal, which she says it creates a space for the PLG residents to put into practice the credo of the 1930s Federal Writers Project, which set out to introduce Americans to America in the context of one Brooklyn neighborhood through portraits, interviews, and local histories. So the authors collectively lay down a geography of the street, taking the reader on a literary tour of the neighborhood. I just think that's so beautifully put. And this is where the neighborhood is, if people don't know, in Brooklyn. So it's so PLG stands for Prospect Lefferts Gardens, which is interchangeably called Flatbush. And it takes its name from Prospect Park, Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, and Lefferts Manor, which is a historical neighborhood with buildings in a specific range of blocks here. So we meet as a group initially, and then to discuss, you know, what you want to write about and sort of develop that idea. And then about halfway through, the writers will meet individually with coaches while they work, you know, and develop their story. And some of the sponsors here were at the time when I was working on this, were Humanities New York, PLG Neighborhood Association, and Long Island University. And all of the journals will be archived at the Brooklyn Public Library. This is Art. He was the first person that I photographed for the journal. And he's writing about his journey to purchasing this 4-story limestone with his wife in the 1970s, and the great lengths they went to redecorate or to renovate their home. And so he's showing me this this room, which is made up entirely of antiques, and how they did the ceiling with the wallpaper, which is 2 different types of wallpaper cut to fit each other. And, you know, his story starts with, I hauled a bag of trash to the curb just as a garbage truck pulled up. I handed the bag to the sanitation guy, and he looked at me and asked, "Why are you hanging on?" And he's referring to that a time when white flight was taking place in PLG, and he was one of the only white homeowners left. And I think I like starting with Art because it's a good example of how sometimes my presentation of my experience working with Voices of Lefferts differs from the journal, in that portraits of my neighbors, you know, so I use different photos than they would in the journal. Sometimes I use color, where that one is entirely black and white. But also sometimes and this is a good example, I'm more interested in what's not being said than what he's actually telling me. So he's showing me also another room, which is more modern art, and again, taking great pride in all these little things I think this is in like the 2nd floor or the 3rd floor of his house. But basically he lives in this room here. So on the 1st floor, on the ground level, because he's 80 and his wife has passed, and he's just alone in this 4-story house, this home. And so I'm kind of more interested in little moments that are happening.
And Alexis, Tell us why you're going from color and black and white. What's the thinking there?
You know, sometimes I just, there are certain tones like in the wood that I feel like you can get more in these specific examples. I don't know, that give for me like an extra layer.
Right. Okay.
So he's very also proud. This is one of the reasons he bought the house, was this with this staircase, but in some ways it looks a little bit like prison bars.
Well,
And this is Frederick Johnson. Frederick is a reverend. He was homeless when he moved to PLG, I think about 20 or so years ago. And so he's writing about God, the one who created heaven and earth. He is the author of my story, your story, every person's story. And so he's talking about like the evolution of what happened to him spiritually once he arrived in this neighborhood, and how he met his wife and changed his life, and how he got involved with the church. And he takes me to one of his favorite markets called La Bay Market on Nostrand Avenue to meet Big Mac. Big Mac's family is a family-owned business, and they're bringing in lots of items from, so PLG is also a very Caribbean American neighborhood. So they're importing a lot of fresh fish and produce and goods from Grenada. And he's also talking so much about the Bible that I finally asked if he wants to read to me from the Bible, and he's really into it. And this is Zhenya. Zhenya is a Reiki practitioner, and she does community, she helps as she's a volunteer organizer for the Maple Street Community Garden. And she's writing about the willow tree that is like statuesque there in the garden. She describes it as a guardian or welcoming presence, that the branches are swaying gracefully in the wind, reminding visitors like me that nothing is what it seems. She stands as a witness to this history of the plot of land now known as the Maple Street Community Garden. She is our elder and our tallest and strongest blossom. And she just writes so beautifully about it. She's just really connected to the soil, the earth. And I guess I just like sometimes the contrast here, black and white color.
very nice.
And this is John. He is my favorite Brooklyn Irishman. And this is his sharp little dog, Klaus. And John is a writer, a musician. He makes hot sauce. He's writing about how his dog got lost and how he can't find him. So I can't actually see the entire text, but you guys, let me just go back. I can read it.
Alexis, as you're going through this, how many more journals will you do? What's your process in doing an ongoing story like this?
Well, I'm not doing the project anymore.
Okay.
So after 4 issues, I decided to step back, and I was gonna do something maybe like a little bit. So I'm really drawn to the hearing the person's voice and bringing a photo to that. But I wanted to maybe do something different, and I left this project, and then I had plans to like explore other options, and then COVID happened.
And then COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that shot.
This is Stephen. He actually goes by his last name, Rice. He's a poet. And as a spoken word poet, he actually goes by the name Definition. And he's also a English teacher, school teacher. He's writing about gentrification, but also just this neighborhood being a mixture of different people and flavors and everything. It's just, he's the man about town. He knows everyone. He's super friendly. He's just Mr. Cool Dude. He takes me to some of his favorite little spots. And this is Robert, one of my favorite people to photograph. Robert's face is just fantastic. And he's a writer, a very gifted writer. And his piece is very unique. He's interweaving quotes and chants, and he's having this ongoing conversation with a dead woman who is Gertrude Lefferts Vanderbilt. So she's one of the original descendants of the Lefferts family. There's this area was called, the immigrants were Dutch, so those were the people that settled here. And so Gertrude is alive in the 1800s, and at the time she was pretty progressive. She was considered progressive in terms of like women's rights, and but Robert takes issue with some of the things that she's writing about. She says, it is not probable that slavery ever exhibited its worst features in Lefferts. A kindly feeling existed between the owner and the slave. The slave returned generally a cheerful obedience and reasonable amount of labor. There are certain conditions under which slavery assumes its most cruel aspect, and these conditions did not exist in Kings County. And so throughout his essay, he's taking bits of her writing and then writing back to her.
What are you shooting with?
5D.
Ian had asked.
In 1956, Robert writes back to her, Flatbush, which is taken from the Dutch word Blakkebush or something like that. He's saying that the children of African heritage, or the colored children, had traversed this giant snowstorm that had landed here. They were the descendants of the once enslaved. And these children of color somehow wandered into this area. But we understand from Isabella, who dropped her Dutch name and picked up Sojourner Truth, that this Vlakkebush had the largest concentration of the enslaved on this side of Mason-Dixon. Call it a farm in the north and a plantation in the south, but to enslave a human is slavery. And we go to the park, we go to Prospect Park, and he's just reciting parts of his essay. He has this quote here from Sojourner Truth. And he's just beautiful.
Alexis.
Really magical moment there.
Did you do any recording?
No. I did. I wanted to do that. I'm with you. It was definitely something, especially for him.
Yeah. You hear the hallelujah.
Oh,
Yeah.
man, he's so good.
Mm.
Sounds just as great.
So I mean, that's an interesting, question for you. As you move forward, do you think I should be recording this, not irregardless of the topic?
Yeah. It's definitely something I've thought a lot about. I also, I've done, just basically also because of the filmmaking background, it's definitely an interest of mine. And I've done stuff in the past just for my own personal use of something that's photographic, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what it's called, but where it's just one shot after the other in movement, and with a recording of a voice.
Yeah.
What's that?
Like a sequence?
No, just I can't remember, but just keeping the shutter down and then putting those photos together so that it's
Mm.
a little stilted as it's moving. I really like that effect, and that with some audio, especially. And I mean, and Robert and I talked
Burst.
about doing that. What's that?
A burst? Is it called a burst?
Yeah.
Yes, somebody just put that in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I've done that before with like little, projects for myself, and I'm just really drawn to that.
Or
And
time.
so David here picks up from he's published in the same journal, so he's also talking about the Lefferts family. And he takes me to the Dutch Reformed Church on Flatbush, where a lot of the Lefferts family members are buried, and their tombstones are engraved in Dutch. And so he does a lot of research at the Brooklyn Historical Society and finds that until the abolition of slavery in New York State in 1827, those kinds of wealthy farmers in Flatbush purchased, owned, and sold slaves. Indeed, the agricultural economy of Kings County during that time depended on slavery. And according to the Brooklyn Historical Society, which maintains a lot of the family archives, in the 1790s, the population of the town of Flatbush included 378 enslaved people, 12 Black free people, and 551 white people. So 75% of whom were slave owners. And David is a trial lawyer and an international human rights activist. Some people write about, their loss of a loved one and their grieving. This is Caroline, like even though they might have happened years ago, like they're still thinking about that loss. And so Caroline lost her mother about 11 years ago, and her father passed away about 4 years ago. And she's trying to come to terms with that and these different memories that she has. And so we go to the park, and she's telling me that one of the ways she feels connected to her mother is through dancing. And she starts dancing for me. Great. This is Allison. She had lost her father and quite recently, and she was telling me that she looked so much like him that when she was little, that they called her Little Eddie. And this woman, a lot of people, it's interesting, they're talking about a loss, but like this woman here is saying it's through the renovation again of her house. And she lost her husband, and then she lost her son, and then she's alone again in these giant houses, these brownstones, and how she had no desire to do anything, and she felt like just so unable to live, and that she also felt that her house was grieving as well. Mm. And this is Dorothy Burnham. When I took this photo, she was 104 years old. And she is an artist. She a very prolific artist. She has just so many paintings. And when she met her husband in the 1930s, they became active in the defense of the Scottsboro Boys, which was 9 Black teenagers unjustly charged with the rape of 2 white women aboard a train in Alabama in 1931. And Dorothy, along with just doing a lot for advocacy, she's also a biology professor, I believe. A professor, I think it's biology. She was named Brooklyn Renaissance Woman, many Lifetime Achievements Awards, recipient of the Heritage Award from the State University of New York Empire State College. Obviously just a beautiful spirit, and I think she's still alive. I guess I would make her maybe 105 now. Each issue takes about, from first meeting of like the whole group to publication, about 4 to 6 months. And at the end, it's all culminated with this reading at the local bookstore where, on Flatbush, of course, where the journals are sold. And it's really great. It's very well attended, I think it's really great closure for everyone involved. And they're reading excerpts of their essays. And there's Art. Look how happy he is. That's it.
I got a feeling that guy's happy a lot of the time, right?
What's that?
I got a feeling that guy's happy a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Right? Just so I mean, like, after now you're done with this, how do you reflect back on it? The value of it, spiritually for you.
I mean, it would be really hard to sum that up because it was really a powerful experience. I mean, left to my own devices, Frank, I would probably just not be that engaged with anybody, and you're just sort of, I had just moved to that neighborhood, I think 2014, and then 2015, maybe I was there. I didn't know anybody in that area, but then, there was a Martin Luther King event at that church where we do the group meets for the writing. And I went there and I was just taking random pictures, and then I met Deborah. And so I sent her the pictures and she was like, "Oh, do you want to be a photographer for this journal?" And I had no idea in fact, there was no journal yet. So I didn't know what it would end up being. And so I just, actually don't live in that neighborhood anymore, but after 4 issues, I would just be walking down the street and I would know everybody,
Right.
It was great.
A real
Just
community.
Invited into people's homes. I love that so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's to your credit. Someone gave you an idea, you jumped on it, and you made something really special out of it. What Ron Levine was saying, work out something with like a great self-promotion from these portraits. I mean, it really is beautiful work. Really, all these environmental portraits, really nice, really nice. So I want to thank you so much for sharing. That was really nice to get. I'm a little bit disappointed on that map of Brooklyn. My Canarsie was not listed.
I'm so sorry.
You have Sheepshead Bay, but you don't have Canarsie, so we won't. We'll hold that against you for a while, not too long. So we'll thank you very much. We will take a very quick break, and we will get Ashok up. Thank you very much, Alexis.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right, we'll get Jay to let you share share your screen.
Okay.
And we have Ashok Sinha. It's all yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Ashok Sinha. Thanks for hanging out. I know I'm competing with President Biden. He's going to be on in a few minutes or half an hour. So thank you for that. Hard act to follow after Ian and Alexis, but I'll try my best. I'm based in New York City, but my talk today is about my book, Gas and Glamour. And we talked a little bit about personal projects. And this is another example where a personal project of 5 years morphed into this book. So even though I'm based in New York, I go to LA a bit because I have family there. So at least a few times a year, and I run away from my in-laws there. So it's a good reason to go out and shoot. That's what I've been told. But whenever we think of LA, you probably think of this, which is a land of highways and cars, which it is. LA is the original car city. And aside from being a photographer of architecture primarily, I'm a big car guy and I love cars. So to me, this project was a perfect merging of the two worlds of architecture and cars, photography, Los Angeles, that kind of stuff. Although LA nowadays primarily known, you have many neighborhoods and cities as just a name on an exit sign, I'm going to take you back on a journey back to the 50s, where you have stuff like this, where before you had these highways, there were these big roads and major arteries where people would travel. So as an architectural photographer, I wanted to capture that lost design history. And It started, and during the 1950s when the highways were happening and suburbs were growing up, people took to the car and they would drive everywhere to work, to school. Pretty much the car was a daily part of their lives. So naturally, food and restaurants and drive-ins were a big part of the daily habit, so to speak. So in this case, this is the oldest surviving McDonald's. It was built in 1953. The reason why it survives is because it was owned by the McDonald's brothers and not the corporation. And in this case, I want to point out a few things. For example, the mascot is not Ronald McDonald. His name was Speedy, because of the speedy service of making burgers. If you remember, McDonald's started in San Bernardino, out east, far east in California, from LA. But they had this new concept where they wanted to showcase their operations and the making of burgers. So you see this use of glass and the use of arches, which was eye-catching. Obviously, signage played a big role in each one of these buildings. The idea was when you drove past, how could a building catch your attention? And so it became a matter of not just architecture, it was about advertising. It was about using graphic design. And all these things were being designed by architects and designers of that time. So these arches, which are back in vogue in these new designs of McDonald's, this was revolutionary at that time. And as you can tell, when I photographed these, I purposely juxtaposed either cars or technology of today to these buildings and kind of show you a view of what a driver would see, or someone who would see when they drove past this building. And I mean, these were stunning. Speaking of stunning, this is my personal favorite because it's got that understated elegance of a diner. This is in this city or town within Los Angeles called Hawthorne, better known now as the home of Tesla. But there are subtleties in this design that were so brilliant. For example, if you notice the letters, chips, it was built in 1957 by a Taliesin trained architect, and it's got the signature of Frank Lloyd Wright everywhere. So again, the concept of glass, the fishbowl concept, welcoming you inside, the use of lighting, which was warm, it wants to make you stop by and just have a cup of coffee or whatever. But these letters that I was saying, yeah, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you give us a little sense of your background, what initially made you interested in the design, in the type, in Frank Lloyd Wright, all of that?
Sure. So real quick, I started my career as pretty much shooting a lot of travel. And I fell into architecture because I photographed a project by a Brazilian architect, Oscar Niemeyer. And after that, since then, I think I got smitten, and something happened to me, and I started looking into architecture and design more and more, and came across all these amazing architects and designers over the years. And I wanted to connect through this project, and I wanted to bring people outside of architecture and design through the use of these photographs, because these are local landmarks. This is a very optimistic time in America. This is about culture, but told in a different way. I wanted to show LA in a whole different light. Even myself have been going there for 15 years or so. Even to my wife, who's actually from Los Angeles, this was all new. But architecture was a vehicle for me to discover a city that I think I know pretty well. So going back to this, what I was saying is, Frank, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It gives you a little bit of insight.
Cool. So if you notice the letters, for example, the word chips, it is actually slightly curved to the direction of traffic. So when you would drive by, you would read these letters when you're driving past. Even the corner, which is this kind of space age cacti, when you drive past it, it's in a corner. So when you make that left turn and you're driving past, you're looking at it right away. So these subtleties in design on the exterior were not only important, they were critical to how these buildings were portrayed. even the interiors, which luckily, and I'll talk about preservation towards the end, but these are original and from the time they were built. And I didn't want to show a lot of interiors only because I wanted to show how these buildings would come across from a motorist standpoint. But these interiors are really, really cool and stunning. Which brings us to more Jetsons like coffee shops and restaurants. This is Penn's. This is an original from 1958. The way I photograph these, again, I'm using a lot of tilt shift work in my, like I do in my regular architectural work. And these are composites of images because, for example, in this case, the letters Pans actually lights up one by one. And there's the other thing, signage. And this, I would say this glow is a big part of this. So I feel like whenever I think of LA, in my mind, I think of this glow, and I thought maybe that's how I'm going to name my book, Gas and Glamour. There's something glamorous about it. So going back to this building, this is almost an oasis in the middle of a traffic circle. It's got that space age UFO looking roof, and obviously the signage. And this is also an important part of not only as a local landmark, but if you look at the interiors, for example, these banquettes were specifically designed in a way it draws you in. Helen Fong, who passed away recently, is one of the architects for this. And if you look at, I like to think of these as not as relics, but living and breathing things. So these are all operating businesses, and that's why I also wanted to put parameters around my research that these would be living, breathing businesses that were built due to car culture. Yes, Frank.
Yeah. So from a research standpoint, do you actually go in to get the information? Do you go online? Do you do both? Like, how do you garnish that?
So yeah, that's a very good question, Frank. So my research consists of a lot of geekiness. I'm a geek at heart, I think, and I am proud to say it. But it meant looking at a lot of research that was done by the Getty Foundation, Los Angeles Conservancy, a lot of white papers that these little towns have written. Nobody reads, but there's someone like me looking them up online. And then there are blogs, there are enthusiasts, there are architects, a lot of people who would write on Facebook, and I connect with them. And when you connect with someone, regardless of whatever it is, I think there's a different connection, and you find a lot about it. So then what I would do, I'd come up with a list, and I actually used Google Street View quite a bit to remote scout a location. However, I soon realized that a lot of the vantage points wouldn't work for me because I usually means I have to be standing in the middle of a 6-lane highway or a road in this case. But it gives you a sense, that's how I kind of went about. And I wanted to make sure that these were connected with the car. I had to do something with it.
Yeah. One other question from Scott. When do you shoot? Because there's no customers in these places.
Yes.
Great observation, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for that. So, I shoot at dusk only because I wanted to show the neon, the lights, and also it was a nod to a passing era. So I wanted to kind of capture that in a sense that these are devoid of people. There are images. In fact, there's one unfortunately it's not in the presentation where there are people in the shot because it was important to the story of that place, and because that was a meeting point for people. But I kind of wanted to have the design speak for itself. I did not want to have people in the shots to take away from the pure design element of it. So
when you make a creative decision like that, right? As you look back, do you feel even more secure in that decision? Do you second guess yourself? Like, how does that work for you?
No, I think I was happy. A lot of happy accidents happened. In terms of I'd move an image just to keep. So, for example, there's a perfect example of that. So there are certain things that you plan for and certain things that you don't plan for. So just when I said, I was shooting at dusk, and if anybody knows LA traffic, it's never predictable. You're either early or late. But I had a specific time window when I wanted to make these photographs, and that was dusk. But when I was going to this location, I was held up by traffic. I was so mad that by the time I reached the location, that light has disappeared and it was dark. And I said, you know what? I sat in traffic for 3 hours. I'm just going to make the picture. And I made the picture, and I think I was so happy because this was a happy accident. And with that dark sky against it, it really showed off the design. And then the devoid of people part of it. I shoot long shutter, so there are people, but they never record on the camera sensor. So I kind of remove people in camera organically. And I felt, as I was shooting it, I kind of had a sequence in mind. So in my mind, the book, for example, is sequenced from dusk to late night. So I figured that would be a way to sequence the images. So here's another example of another diner from 1957, an original, threatened by demolition, but finally the town stepped in and said, no, we can't have this go away. This is part of who we are. And it's still there. It's still operating. It's part of the Norm's Diner chain, and it's the oldest one. And this is a view. I would not recommend anybody attempting this, just like they say in the commercials. I did want to photograph it blurry because I wanted to show the motion from a driver's standpoint, and just to show you the sense of how in a seemingly average neighborhood, there would be this beacon that would basically look at you and want you and really beckon you to come in, even if you were not in the mood. And I kind of wanted to get that in my head, saying, what were these designers thinking? And why is this important now, especially? So we move along to fun architecture. Humor is not a big part of architecture in general, and there are different styles of it. And this is like when I talked about advertising, for example, this was a different kind of advertising. The building was the product that was being sold, in this case, a donut. This is in La Puente, East LA, built in either 1967 or 68, still operating as a donut shop. I photographed it. I drove through it at least 5 or 6 times, and not once did the person behind the counter think that was odd. I don't know why, but it was all right. And the other thing I want to point out is I'm not staging any of these photographs, so there's a lot of wait and see. I wanted this white truck or white car with the lights on. So all these kind of crazy, quirky ideas I have, I just stand there and hope it'll happen, and it usually does, luckily so far. So there are certain things to note. The exit has been reversed now in the signage. And the other thing I want to point out is I started noticing these quirkiness, these details, such as the graphic design, the typography was such an important piece of this structure, like a fiberglass structure. Like when you drive past it, it's just a bizarre giant donut, and you can't miss it. And there's local lore that newlyweds actually drive through it. So there's something there.
It's interesting listening to you when, so many photographers, are shooting portraits or shooting on location or doing whatever they do. And we always hear so much about, this waitress or that owner or somebody in the place. And you tell the story of the building itself having these quirkiness, having these personalities, this charm, which is really intriguing, because, we're not hearing about those wacky waitress or the cook or the owner. We're hearing about, what you're shooting and what's important. It's really a nice, it's really captivating, to understand the quirkiness of the building.
Thank you, Frank. And you're not the only one. Even the person who was behind the counter said, "What do you see? What?
Yeah.
After the 7th time, she said, "I noticed." I'm like, "Did you not notice me driving through?" She's like, "What do you see in this building?" I'm like, "You got to be kidding me, right?" Like,
Yeah.
And I gave her the whole history of it and why it's important. And then she said, I get it. So anyways, I guess, we have our own things. And to me, these buildings have their own story, like you said. And that's my goal in chasing these. For example, this one too, North Hollywood, another example of they call them programmatic architecture, which is, again, in this case, it was built by a Hollywood set designer in the late 49-ish, I think. And, it was almost being being kind of abandoned and then revived by this restoration group. I love the name, idle hour, idling our engine and having a drink and getting, I'm like, come on. But this is one of the ones that, and again, little details, I'm sure photographers on this call would appreciate. I wanted that guy to be in the car with his phone on, it's like lit, it's weird stuff like that. But the interiors, for example, are very, very interesting. In fact, you can see on the wall, I don't know if it comes through on the presentation, the original black and white, but the interiors are original and it's got this interesting curved structure. And people were important here because I wanted to add scale to this a little bit more than the others, and just the uniqueness of it. And then there are, again, more quirky stuff. This is this is obviously a Cadillac, as you can tell. It's a strip mall that never had a car dealership. It's literally a strip mall, but there are these unique design elements that has a story to tell. So you notice the headlights and whatnot, but I don't know how many of you noticed that on the side pillars underneath the fins, those are actually the tires of the building. And you pass this neighborhood and suddenly comes up and it's just like, why would somebody ever do that? But made me look, and one of the interesting things, I went like many times to photograph this. I always wondered what was behind that curtain in the grill. I wondered if I could get access going there, but didn't happen. Which brings us to more Cadillac, but this is actually an original, lucky for us, because this is a classic car dealership. And this was a concept, again, this was new, using glass, but in this case, showcasing products you were selling. Perhaps you would want to buy a new Cadillac. And notice the lettering, it's actually the original lettering from a 1949 Cadillac. The use of stucco, billboards, which we see right now, even in vogue today in shopping malls and whatnot, that was a new concept at that time. Using this whole inside outside California feel, using plants inside. The idea was you would come in there, you spend time, look at some cars, have a great time, maybe end up buying one, but it was all about that experience and how could that building give you that experience. This is one of my favorite pictures, because not only because of this sweeping UFO like vibe to it, but this is actually a gas station in Beverly Hills, built around 1965. This actually was going to be part of the LAX airport, and it was moved to Beverly Hills because it didn't fit the master plan. So it ended up being a gas station canopy in Beverly Hills, and talk about uniqueness. You couldn't miss it. It has got, it's the same architect that built the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it looks like the TWA airline at Kennedy Airport back in the day. It has that kind of feel to it. Yeah.
I mean, I in the book we say it took flight. It took flight in Beverly Hills as a gas station. So for sure, it has that, and you see it at night. And how could you not just stop and look at the beauty of this gas station canopy? This was a weird place to take a picture because this was one of those things you had to make a left turn, but once you made the left turn, you had to make 6 turns to come back to it. And I had to make this picture at the red light, and trust me, it wasn't a fun experience.
I love this idea with the technology, just that is really great. I really love, that you've sprinkled that in here to give a context of things.
Thank you, Frank. I think, going back to what you asked me before, I had I was at a crossroads whether I get actually cars or whatever from that era and position them and photograph them that way. But then I decided, no, I think I should go the other way around, because I want to make people look at these pictures and say, no, this is not from the 50s. This is actually today. And maybe I should go look at them So yeah, the juxtaposition of it.
Yeah, and what do you shoot when you're in the car? What are you shooting with?
So yeah, I have a couple of very basic things, but like kind of this is handheld, but sometimes I would use something I used in very guerrilla style filmmaking, using the camera strap and using my neck as a brace. Don't recommend it, but it works. And using, I'm told that I have steady hands or whatever, but I breathe slowly and I pray that it'll be an acceptable picture. But I try to brace myself as much as I can when I'm shooting handheld, especially a picture like this is a very difficult thing to accomplish. So it takes a lot of tries. But on the other hand, all the other pictures are all shot on a tripod, absolutely. And and also because I'm compositing exposures and shooting tilt shift lenses, which is also, again, expanding my field of view. I have no other option but to shoot with a tripod, which is a good thing in a way because it makes my presence felt. For example, shooting this car wash, not a great part of town near the airport. And if someone who's been to LA, you probably see these car washes everywhere in LA. From the 60s, hard to find a designer or an architect, but I mean, come on, look at those fins. I mean, who takes the time to design a car wash with that kind of level of detail to bring you in? And talking about technique, obviously you can tell it's a long shutter. I had to fill the foreground. There was nothing much going on. And the idea of jet and the jet, I'm like, it could be kind of cool to show that. And again, this was a tilt shift shot. I had to shift it over quite a bit to get the whole car wash in basically one frame, but it didn't look distorted. So prime lenses, all perspective corrective lenses. This is another one. This is in North Hollywood, going back to car washes and how design elements and typography were so important. I mean, those trusses were as important for structure, but as important to draw your attention, use of lights, use of those big letters. They all played a role in how architecture was more of a advertising vehicle, more than just the building itself.
Yeah, and Ashok, do you find that some of these buildings had been repurposed, like they were designed for something else first, and then they came to something else? Is there any evolution on some of these?
I have found a couple. Actually, there's a gas station in LA, which is now a Starbucks. It's really, really cool. Maybe Ian will remember. The name escapes me. But there are a couple of buildings like that, which used to be, something else. I can't remember, but all these, again, going back to my parameters for this book, they had to be original, not altered in a major way, maybe some repairs, and most importantly, had to be functioning businesses. Speaking of other unique forms of architecture, is this a drive-through dairy, which is the only remaining in Los Angeles. So the dairy is behind you don't see it, it's the right of the picture. And they built this in 1961. It was called a marvel of architecture and whatnot, because you could drive up on your way back home and get milk and whatnot. And so these boxy structures still exist. The parabolic curves and the rainbow colors, again, playing a role in how this building brought you in from the road and essentially easy in and out. This site, we don't know if it's going to survive or not, because in my 5 years of photographing this project, the 5th year, it was abandoned sort of, but they were doing some work. So I'm just hoping that there's some landmarking involved and it will survive.
So do you have a sense of what the challenges are to keep these buildings alive? Is it because structurally they may fall down, they're so old, or they're not built in a way to last so long, like a regular, building that goes up and down? Is there
yeah. I think all of the above. I think the majority. I mean, again, I think we're experiencing that in New York today. But I think the challenge there is these are sort of, I call them vernacular architecture, right? I mean, I call them local landmarks, but to a lot of people it's vernacular, very regular, commonplace. But unless you recognize that these are important to be preserved, there's always a pressure of redevelopment and whatnot to turn them into something else or tear them down completely. There's a question of repairs and maintenance. And to that point, the reason why I wanted to actually include them in the book is that I want people to go out there and give them business. Because without business, and we can talk about preservation and whatnot, they're going to turn into a relic or an abandoned lot if they don't have business.
That's right.
From a maintenance perspective, at the end of the day, we might have the best intentions, but if the business is not making money, it's probably not going to survive. And then, the pressure of redevelopment and changing them and altering them is always there. So that's a constant thing. So this is a bowling alley. I just want to talk 1 minute about it. This was on Holt Avenue in Montclair. And this was before Route 10, which is a big highway, was built. And the reason why this bowling alley is in my book is because when these suburbs were happening, people had to find something to do, and they had to find recreation for their families and whatnot. So Gordon Powers, who built this, he actually transformed the sport of bowling from a men-only sport to a family sport. And again, the idea was you would drive from your home, now you live in the suburbs, have something to do, drive to the parking lot, walk right through. So even though this may not be right on the highway next to the street, this was a very, very important part of how cars and architecture interacted with each other and city planning and whatnot. Then I talk about a couple of, my last section here is obviously motels. In this case, this is Pasadena. This is the only little part of Route 66 that passes through Los Angeles. It starts all the way in Santa Monica and goes through LA. Actually, it ends in Santa Monica, I'm sorry. But it does pass through Pasadena. And this is, you might be familiar with this because this is where the Rose Parade goes by. And this was almost at that time, back in 1959, this was like an oasis, a pit stop along that route. The Moorish lettering is actually landmarked. Go ahead, you have a question?
I am trying to read a magazine and watching a presentation on Zoom.
Oh, I guess it's not for me. I'll continue. So a couple of things, the lettering, the Moorish lettering is an important design element, the breeze blocks of this motel. And then an interesting story here, the carport, which was an innovative structure at that time. So I wanted to have a car in there. Again, going back to what I was saying about business, it was heartbreaking to see like how long I had to wait for a car to drive into this. And after a while, it did drive in, but I wanted it to be the right shape and the right color. It didn't happen, and had to have their brake lights on, all that kind of stuff, which is not an issue on a commercial shoot because we obviously set everything up. But in this case, as a personal project, it was a whole different challenge. And also other stuff, like I went there a couple of times. The first time I went in, I was all set and the light was perfect and everything. And I see people gathering. I'm like, what happened? They're like a long line around the block. I said, what's going on? Do people know that I'm shooting today? Is that my fan following? And they started laughing. I'm like, What happened was there's a pizzeria opening up next door and they were giving out free pizza. So there you go. My shoot didn't happen because it was impossible to crowd control and get all this. So I had to come back a couple of times, finally got this. I was very happy with this picture because it kind of shows you the context of the carport and the design elements of this motel. Speaking of motels, a quirky one, some of you might know, this is one of the two left in the Wigwam family, built in 1950. Not appropriate, politically correct, whatever you might say, but they were a destination, using architecture as a kind of a wonderland destination to bring you in, to give you an experience. And this was, again, far out east, the furthest east I've traveled in LA County for this, is the Wigwam. And I want to end with this, which is this motel, which is, again, in North Hollywood. Many of them line this road, Lankershim Boulevard, which goes to Route 99. And again, there are certain elements of this, right? The simplest structure, the use of neon, the signage. But what I found also was subtleties, like you can see over time, the exit is now the entrance. The arrows point differently. The motel is clearly not in good shape. So this is not a landmark motel. It may not survive this, but as a design history element, as a history of Los Angeles, as a history of the town, it's important. It's important that it stays and it gets preserved. So all this culminates into, and then, like I said, some shameless self-promotion here, which is my book, that culminated into a book, and I was lucky and fortunate to get some press on it. There's that website if you want to have a signed copy. There's a code to use, and my Instagram handle and my website at the bottom. But more importantly, I would love for everyone to, oh, I forgot to mention the important element of the book is that we have QR codes at the back of the book. So I didn't want to keep these locations as a secret to myself. I want to share with as many people as possible. So even if you didn't go there, you could QR code the locations and find the where they are in Los Angeles. And even when you go to Los Angeles, maybe make a road trip, which is to go and see these amazing buildings and the heritage. So that's my presentation. I don't know if I went over my time, but I'm going to stop sharing. Or
no, that was absolutely wonderful, really wonderful, and that's very nice to give a discount on the book. I mean, and there's even more imagery in the book.
Yes. So I this book is published as like I want to say a 60 page book. There are more images in the book than what I shared. The commentary, I wanted to leave it as very magazine style. So the images are large and, like the captions, I mean, if I might, like here's the book, that's how the layout is.
Yeah.
And the captions are in the corner. It talks about, pop culture references. And there are secondary images, which I showed some of you, which is in the back for the QR codes.
And you did the writing as well, Ashok?
No, so it was done by an editor for Interior Design Magazine, did the writing. And in fact, we have 3 essays in the book, one by a curator, one by an architect, and one by me. So we wanted to get a sense of how the same subject matter is approached by 3 different people from 3 different disciplines.
That's a wonderful idea to bring other people in. And I have to say, everybody in the chat room is just loving it.
Thank you very much. And I hope I hope this encourages people to go out and not only see stuff in their own town, I mean, but just to share this and we're so much in our towns and places like Los Angeles. So, and architecture is a way to have a conversation, I think, it's different, but it's fascinating.
And what's the next project?
I know, Frank, everybody asks me about that. I would love to shoot this kind of projects for a living, historic preservation projects. And I don't know, there have been some sort of new avenues of showing work and stuff like that. But what I would like to do is to continue this way of looking at streetscapes or architecture around a theme, maybe in some other town, not Los Angeles, maybe closer to home this time, and have like a compendium of that concept and idea. Maybe Florida or Colorado, I've heard, and obviously Wildwood, New Jersey has some. So there are some locations like that.
Right. Wonderful. Well, yeah, I encourage everyone to go out and get the book, and you get a 15% discount, which is really cool. That's very nice of you to do that. So the chat room is open. If anyone else has any questions for Ashok or any of our other speakers, jump on. We'd love to continue to yak for a while. But I want to thank everyone for showing up once again. And I'm not sure when the next date is in May, but we'll be around. We'll be around. So thanks, everybody. If anyone has any questions. put in. Yeah, Alexis, thank you very much. I don't know if I know Ian had to go, so I'm not sure if he's still with us.
Still here.
But,
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, standing offer for you guys to come back with the next new book, the next new body of work. We of course would love to have you all the time. All the
Great
time.
work, Ashok.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a pleasure. Thank you, Frank, for doing this and bringing our community together. Most importantly, you're doing amazing work.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for it on behalf of everybody.
It's all good. It's all good stuff. And you got through that, Ashok, without showing a T-shirt or anything. It's
Well, it's coming if you really want to stay on for the after party.
there you go. I knew there was something up your sleeve. I knew it. I knew you couldn't be trusted. Knew it.
We should hope to meet you
but-
in person one day.
Absolutely. Love that.
Yeah.
Would love that.
Yeah, I guess we probably had, I don't know, maybe 350 speakers on projection. At some point, we have to bring everyone together. That would be fun. Some kind of
Sometime before August.
yeah, before August, yes, yeah. But it's but yeah, this will continue, all the time, and everyone should notice our dear friend Sandy has gone to sleep. And we love it, that. And Ashok, you shouldn't take that personally that she fell asleep during your presentation. But
I
that's
love it.
very nice. But yeah, shut that off now, Jay. But that was just nice. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady. A wonderful lady. But you can yeah. Thank you. So yeah. So everybody, thanks very much. Have a great rest of the week. Be safe, and we'll see you on the road.